Hello everybody, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis and welcome to today's video. Today is going to be a my thoughts on video, or as someone in the comments very adequately called it after last time, the non-ranty rant where I talk about what's going on in the news. Because as much as I don't podcast is amazing for talking about the news, as people have pointed out, there is kind of a lack of time for a long-winded discussion. That's true, it's a thing, it exists. And sometimes I have opinions. You know I have opinions. My opinions are quite strong in some cases. So I wanted to talk at length about certain topics, and the Codex releases last time, a couple of weeks ago, is one of them, and this is another. And this is about the Black Library Weekender, which at the time of you're watching this video will have already happened. Now, the Weekenders are basically big open events where Black Library or Forge World or whoever's running the event gets to talk at length, maybe give presentations about what's going on. You either have like meetups, signings, all these sorts of good things, interview panels, and presentations of what's to come. And there's usually some pretty big releases or hints at what's to come. They're kind of, I don't want to call them a bit like E3, where they sort of show off what's to come, because that implies that GW work like the gaming industry, never mind. Anyway, it's kind of a bit of a showcasey event, and I really want to go to one at some point, but that's for the future. The Horus Heresy Weekender we had last year, or earlier this year, I should say, sorry, I think in academic terms, that we had about 6 months ago, around the time of Gathering Storm 2 and 3, brought us a lot of stuff for Book 7. It was the first proper look at Book 7 for the Horus Heresy. It wasn't the release of Magnus yet, but it was the beginnings of the lead up to the release of Magnus, and I love the Magnus model, discussed that before. And the Black Library Weekender this year it's a pretty action-packed event. So what have we got going on? Well, for February we have three titles coming out, which are The Magos, which is an Eisenhorn novel, it's the definitive casebook of Gregor Eisenhorn, as well as the new Eisenhorn novel. We have a Lucas the Trickster novel, so if you like your Space Wolves, Josh Reynolds has given you that. And if you're a fan of Imperial Knights, then Andy Clark has given you Knight's Blade. However, they are not going to have to be waited until February for those, because they're going to be at the Black Library Weekender, which is really awesome. So if you want to know more about how it works, actually I can give you the whole spiel here. So if you want to know what a Weekender is for future, you get to meet the creative teams, ask the questions in seminars, you get signings, and you get access to pre-releases early. And that's what's going to be happening here. The Magos, Lucas the Trickster, and Knight's Blade, and potentially others are going to be available. We also have a lot of pre-release titles that are also going to be available, such as The War Master, which is a new Gaunt's Ghosts novel that also includes some bonuses that are going to be available at the event. If you want to go to Warhammer Community, Dan Ammett did a really long interview, about half an hour on the book, including a reading from it. So if you want to know what's to come, it's Gaunt's Ghosts, kind of you know how that works, but you might want to. As well as the fact that the new editions of the first two omnibuses will also be available if you need to catch up. We also have a new Horus Heresy book. This is actually really interesting. This is coming out in about a month. It's called Old Earth, and it's by Nick Kime. Now, because it's by Nick Kime, and Nick Kime is pretty much the Salamanders guy, at least I don't remember anyone writing Salamanders who's not Nick Kime, it's a Salamanders book, centering, of course, on Vulcan, because it's the Horus Heresy and all that stuff. And it talks about Vulcan setting his sights on Terra and undertaking a difficult and dangerous journey to the cradle of humanity. Now, forgive me for getting my own lore if I missed something, but I don't remember Vulcan going to Terra in the Horus Heresy, because there was the Dropsite Massacre, then he was captured and held prisoner by Curs, then he was in Imperium Secundus fighting Curs all the time, then he flipping died again to John Grammaticus, and then he was taken back to Nocturne and resurrected. I don't remember Vulcan going anywhere near Terra before the Battle of Terra. I just don't, because if they'd have gone to Terra after Vulcan's resurrection, I don't know how many times Vulcan had died by this point, but he was resurrected many, many times. He's perpetual. I don't remember him going to Terra between being reborn on Nocturne again and the end of the battle. So what's going on with this? I'm really, really intrigued. So, Nick Kai, you've got my interest. There'll be some interesting lore here. And of course, we also know about the other Horus Heresy book that has been talked about, Ruinstorm. That's already out, I believe, or if it's not, then it's out pretty damn soon. And that is also about the run home for Terra, for the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines. All really interesting because we're building up to the grand climax, which we discussed a little bit on the podcast last week or the week before. Also coming forward, we have a new series. I'm going to skip over this now because I want to talk about it in a bit more depth later. Suffice to say, it's very modern era stuff. And we also have a new omnibus, which is going to be about the xenos, which is pretty damn cool. And we have an audio drama, which is interesting, called The Geld. Now, this is a Raven Guard novel. And now I'm not a huge fan of the Raven Guard. I'm not a huge fan of Corax either. I've made that clear in the past. But this follows a group called the Shadow Masters, or at least their descendants. These are the warriors who can Wraith Slip. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, Wraith Slip was Corax's ability where he could basically turn invisible. I don't think it was exactly turning invisible, but it functioned very broadly like turning invisible. He was basically able to remove people's perception of him from their minds. It was a very interesting ability, and some of his sons picked it up. Nightona Sharakin and the Horus Heresy is a very popularly known one, but there are many more, and it seems to have been passed on through the generations somehow, and this follows these guys. We've got some other new audio dramas, Renegades of Elysia, which is the second in an audiobook series. We have a Harlequins audiobook called Heirs of the Laughing God by Gav Thorpe, which is very interesting because Harlequins are a very funky faction. And then we have a Rogue Trader audio drama by James Swallow called Corsair, The Face of the Void. And Rogue Traders are very, very fun, but we don't know loads about them, so interesting again. We also have Rogue Traders, the Omnibus, which is going to be collecting together a bunch of novels by Andy Hoare, which is cool. And it includes a book in there called Savage Scars, which is a Tau White Scar battle novel. That seems to have been a common theme that's happened before. And most interestingly from the individual releases, aside from maybe Old Earth, to my mind, is Fabius Bile Clone Lord. This is the sequel to Fabius Bile Primogenitor by Josh Reynolds, and it takes Fabius Bile to Solemnace. Now, Solemnace, that's a name that should ring for a couple of people. A few bells should be going off in your mind, because Solemnace is the homeworld of none other than Trazyn the Infinite. Oh, dear God. Fabius Bile on the same planet as Trazyn the Infinite. Oh, yes. Oh, very much yes. If you've minimized the window because there's nothing interesting to see on the screen, I'm doing one of those sort of evil villain hand thingies right now. Oh, I'm intrigued. Now, Trazyn's most famous ability is the ability to pretty much transplant his body and personality from one host to another. It's pretty damn weird, but it allows him to never die, in effect. And Fabius also has clones. So this makes me wonder, is Fabius going to basically do what Trazyn can do, learn the trick, and basically be able to teleport himself from body to body? And if he's got clones, no one would ever know. He'd just be able to hop between which body he needed to be in order to carry out such an experiment or fight such and such a battle, or not, as the case may be. That's an interesting idea, and I'd be interested to see if they run with that. On top of that, Solemnace is full of flipping everything. Like, seriously, I think Trazyn has collected just about everything in the galaxy at this point, from Space Marines to... I think he's actually got Lord Solar Macarius, or an entire contingent of troops that fought alongside Lord Solar Macarius, as well as Inquisitor Greyfax was once in his custody before she was let out in the event of Gathering Storm 1. Suffice it to say, if Fabius doesn't have the whale of a time on Solemnace, whilst he isn't getting killed, this is going to be fantastic. This could be really, really interesting to get a proper look at the Solemnace Museum and all the stuff that's there, as well as how Trazyn operates, how Fabius operates, and how the two might interact if they do. Very intriguing. And then we have a couple of fantasy omnibuses, which are just collating together a couple of famous series, depicting, for example, Malekith and the Vampire Lords. So the von Carstein family, and Malekith, which is interesting if you are wanting to catch up on all things fantasy before things became Age of Sigmar. Now, what I want to talk about the most is this little series. It's called Space Marine Conquests. Okay, so there was a series of novels, and I believe it might still be going on. It's called Space Marine Battles. It was a series of 41st Millennium stories involving the Space Marines. So this included titles such as Rin's World, Hell's Reach, Purging of Cadillus, Death of Antagonists, Plagues of Arath, Damocles, The Hunt for Valdorius, Siege of Castellax, which was an Iron Warrior-centered one, the Gildar Rift, which was partially centered on the Red Corsairs, it was also about the Silver Skulls, and Architect of Fate. There were others as well that have slipped my mind right now. It was a very expansive series. There were a lot of books in there that generally put the Astartes over in a very good way, made them look badass, but also made their opponents look badass if they were handled correctly. For example, Hell's Reach is one of my favourite novels of all time, just because it's so very damn well written. Thank you, Aaron Dembski-Bowden. But this series is Space Marine Conquest, and it's set not in M41, but in M42, which means it takes place after the return of Guilliman. So we're going to be having stories involving the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Dark Imperium, and all of those other shenanigans, as well as the Primaris Marines. I wasn't sure whether to make this video an actual discussion of the Primaris Marines. I'll talk about them very briefly when we get to them. The first of the novels coming out, which will be out on pre-order by the time you're watching this video, excuse me, is The Devastation of Baal. The Devastation of Baal is a very important event in M42 because it's one of the only ones we actually know about, so it kind of is important by default. This is the invasion of the Blood Angels' home system / home world by the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan, I believe. And the novel centers on the entirety of the Blood Angels and their successors coming together to try and hold them off. Not only does this set up some absolutely badass storylines of Blood Angels being badass, and it also says that the Tyranids in an interesting way if they handle them correctly, which it's being written by, who's writing it? It is Guy Haley. I trust Guy Haley. He's a very good author. He wrote Dark Imperium. He wrote Baneblade, which is a very good novel. He's a good trusted author. He knows what he's doing. If he puts the Tyranids over well, and he puts the Blood Angels over well, that could be a fantastic read. And I'm very intrigued to see whether he's going to go and touch on what actually happened at the end, which was the stuff related to Ka'Bandha. Because in The Devastation of Baal, if I remember it correctly, and someone correct me in the comments if I get this wrong, I believe that Ka'Bandha and his minions, I suppose, basically sent High Fleet Leviathan into the warp. All of it. And yeah, that was basically it. And basically it was his way of saying, also through a giant pile of skulls somewhere else, the Blood Angels are my kill. Which is interesting, because if you look at Cygnus Prime, well, Ka'Bandha's been fighting the Blood Angels for over 10,000 years. Cygnus Prime, the Battle of Terra. Ka'Bandha's been around the Sons of Sanguinius for a long time, so maybe he does just want them to die by his own hand. He doesn't want the Tyranids having all the fun. So I'm intrigued to see how that's going to be handled. And it also allows us to see how the Dark Imperium actually is. Because the only novel we've got that's set post-Guilliman is Dark Imperium, and that's following Guilliman and the Indomitus Crusade. Rather than looking at the galaxy as a whole, it's quite centered on Guilliman, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine, but it doesn't give us the context of the universe, which is something that we are still lacking right now. This will allow us to see what it's actually like to live in the Dark Imperium, and in the time, either just before or just after the Astronomicon goes off and comes back on again, which is very, very important, because without the Astronomicon, how is anything going to function? And this is something I really just want to explore, so kudos for that. We also have coming a novel called Ashes of Prospero, and this one follows, as the title doesn't actually suggest, but it is actually the case, the Space Wolves. And how it is explained in brief, it is a disparate warband of space wolves braving the Great Rift and the Thousand Suns in order to save their battle brothers of the 13th Company. Okay, this is a little interesting, because the 13th Company have been back now for actually quite a while. In our perceptions of the universe, they've been back for like 6 months, 8, 9 months at this point. And as far as we knew, they were all back because the Space Wolves went on extensive hunts to find them and get them before the Imperium found out about them. Didn't work, led to the Siege of the Fenris system, all of that stuff. But So obviously there are still Wolfen on the loose. And this really is interesting because, well, one, we actually get to see what it's going to be like to deal with the Great Rift. We haven't had to see what the Secretary Smiley is like in too much detail yet, especially because, well, Gilliman had the Sisters of Silence around, and that may or may not have had an influence on the Secretary Smiley. So these Space Wolves don't have that luxury, and they've got to go and deal with it to find some Wolfen. And there's going to be Thousand Suns involved, and I love Thousand Suns, and it's really interesting. The third book, which we're not getting just yet, is coming in 2018. It's called War of Secrets, and take one guess as to who War of Secrets is about. Ding, 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 you guessed right, it's the Dark Angels. This novel is being written by Phil Kelly. For the record, Ashes of Prospero is being written by none other than Gav Thorpe, another very well-respected and trusted author. But Phil Kelly is a guy I really like, because Phil Kelly wrote the 4th edition Orc Codex, which was the first book I ever read from this series, from this hobby, and so I'm kind of biased. I love Phil Kelly. So Phil Kelly is writing War of Secrets, and it's about the Dark Angel, but it's not about what the Dark Angels are doing, it's about, well, it is about what the Dark Angels are doing, but it's about the Dark Angels and the Primaris Marines. This is going to be interesting, because the way it's explained is this. How does it say? Phil Kelly explores a violent clash of culture and war philosophy between the Dark Angels and their new Primaris brethren, which sees the Primaris question whether the shadowy chapter that resents their addition is a greater threat to their existence than the Tau that they are fighting. Oh, the setup here is fantastic. Now, I'll get on to the whole Primaris Civil War argument, because, God, that's an interesting argument, but this is something that people have been wanting to know. How are the Primaris gelling with other chapters? Because we don't know. Some chapters are taking them on willingly. Some chapters love them, some chapters hate them. The Crimson Fist really like them. The Imperial Fist don't, ironically. The Ultramarines seem to be fine with it. Apparently, the Dark Angels really don't like them. And that's interesting. Probably because they're outsiders and thus can't tell them about the Fallen, da-da-da-da-da. So that will be very interesting to see how that all pans out. Because obviously the Primaris Marines are coming basically from the training of old school Johnson or Gilliman. Their war philosophy is going to be completely radically different, as well as their mindset, to the Dark Angels. This is such an interesting clash of styles, and I really want to see it, which is fantastic. Yes, brilliant. And we also said that the series is going to be able to explore the battle tactics of the various established chapters, but we'll also get to see the Primaris Marines in all their glory and how they adjust to life in their new chapters, which is going to be very, very interesting. Neil Roberts is doing all the artwork, apparently, which is pretty damn awesome, because it is really good artwork for both Ashes of Prospero and Devastation of Baal. And this is interesting, and we also know that the 4th book, which is an exclusive reveal for this little article on Warhammer Community, is going to be Ultramarines, written by Ian St. Martin, and it's going to be, it doesn't have a title here, but it's Ultramarines and their Primaris brothers, so that's going to be very intriguing as well, because that's a different way of looking at the Primaris Marines. All in all, the importance of this series probably can be stressed enough, but I really need to make it clear. This series is our biggest look at context for what's going on in the post-Gilliman 40k galaxy. That is critically important, because right now we don't sodding know. We've got little bits of context here and there from the codices and the rulebooks, and Dark Imperium did its fair share, that's great. But this is the first set of novels. We'll get to see the Devastation of Baal in huge detail, rather than just seeing a snippet about it in the Blood Angels Codex. We'll get to see how the Dark Angels and the Primaris Marines are working together, rather than just be mentioned, probably in passing, in the coming Dark Angels Codex. And for Space Wolf players who've got nothing thus far, this will be really good to see how you're coming back from the Siege of the Fenris system and the battles with the Thousand Suns. So there's a lot to look forward to in this series, and as the series goes on, I'm sure we'll get to explore these dynamics more and more with, let's say, the Flesh Terrors, who we know really don't get on with the Primaris Marines. This is heavily implied. I believe there was an interview with Andy Smiley, I forget how his name is pronounced right now, about how the Flesh Terrors probably don't like the Primaris Marines, so it'll be interesting to see how they behave, although we might see that in Devastation of Baal, who knows. We've also got to look at, I don't know, how the Xenos are getting on, because while these series are going to be about the Space Marines, we'll get to see a little bit about how the Xenos are operating. So, for example, War of Secrets is going to be involving the Tau. Which sphere of Tau is this going to be? Which of these Tau are we going to be fighting? Thus, what do we know about how the Tau are dealing with what's happened? Are they from the 4th sphere before they got lost? Are they from the 5th sphere? Or is this just a world that the Imperium is invading? This is going to be very interesting to see how it all pans out. Now, just quickly, before people do, I did say I'd discuss this. Let's talk about Primaris Marines very quickly. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail here, that's not the point of this video, but I just want to make the point, and if you want to see a bit of a longer discussion about Primaris Marines, you can go check out Chapter Master Valrak if you haven't watched his stuff before, because he did a quite decent video quite recently talking about the Primaris Marines and why they get so much hate and maybe why they shouldn't. And I fall into the camp of I don't particularly mind. The Primaris Marines, to me, are an interesting plot development. Sure, they came out very, very quickly through Call and Gilliman and shenanigans. Fine, it was a little bit out of left field, but then again, this is the Great Crusade Mark II if we're being very, very generic. So, introducing new Space Marines, fine. Kind of works, and if you look at what they are, it's not improving on the Emperor's finest warriors, because the Space Marines were flawed as hell. If you don't accept that by now, then what do you even know about the Primarchs, for goodness sake? So improving on the Emperor's work, fine, absolutely no problem. We know Corax has done that. Excuse me. Compose. We know the Corax has done it with the Raptors until the Alpha Legion bugging it up, so it can be done. There is canonical evidence for it being done. Don't complain about it for that. Sure, they're a little bit ham-fisted in right now. They don't have huge amounts of characters. That's why this series is so critically important, because it will allow us to flesh out the Primaris Marines, see them both as individuals and as Astartes fighting as part of chapters. This is going to be really, really important to see how they evolve and what dynamic GW is going to set them up with compared to the regular Astartes and compared to the galaxy as a whole, which is very, very important. As for everything else, whether you think they're like an abomination, I honestly, no, they're not. I've already mentioned that they make sense if you look at the lore hard enough and from the right sort of angle. It can be justified. Sure, it's a little bit out of left field, sure they're a little bit Mary Sue-ish right now, but that's because we just don't have enough information, and that's why I think this novel series is so important, and that's why I've saved my thoughts on the Primaris Marines until now. As it is, I particularly don't mind the Primaris Marines. I don't particularly mind the Primaris Marines. They're an interesting concept, they've got a lot of things that I want to know, so therefore I'm intrigued, and that's a good setup. And that's something that the 40k universe does really, really well. Gives you just enough information that if you don't have a rage quit, you are intrigued to learn more. And that's what this universe does so well, and that's why I love it. So there was enough information that made enough sense for me to go, yes, please give me more, but it hasn't been the huge grab of, yes, Primaris are amazing, tell me everything now, I need to know. So, not a bad job on their introduction. Could have been handled better, but then lore wasn't top of the priority list with 8th edition, I suppose. I mean, we got Dark Imperium, now we're getting this, but it wasn't top of the list of things to do. Alright, fine, so what? Anyway, that is my very long-winded thoughts on the Arkham Blackadder weekend and the implications of the novels based. So as I say, it's going to be an interesting event, and if people get a chance to go to the weekend, which has already happened by the time you watch this video, then do let me know in the comments how it was, whether you learned anything interesting, whether any of the interview panels gave anything of note, because as much as it would pain me to troll Tactica and Bell of Lost Souls, or even goddamn Reddit to try and find out, I don't have the time right now because I've got exams coming up. Yeah, long story short. So please do let me know how you think the weekend is going, and let me know what you thought about the novels, because there's a lot to discuss here. If you've got any other things come up in the news, do let me know, and I'll see if I can do another one of these rambly, non-ranty rant things in the future, because I do enjoy doing them and getting my thoughts out there. So, thank you all for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis. Until the next time, I will see you all again. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.